El pretérito, the perfect past. So for this lecture, el pretérito, we are first going to discuss what is the preterite, and then what do the regular verbs do when we put them in the preterite, and in addition, what do the verbs that end in car, gar, and sar do that is different from the others, and last, what do the verbs ser and hacer do for the preterite, which is the past tense in Spanish. As mentioned, el pretérito is the past tense in Spanish. There are different ways to use the past tense in all languages, but the one that you're using here is the equivalent to when you would use the ed in English. So anytime you would add ed in English, you would use the pretérito in Spanish, which is what you're about to learn. So in the case of started, so I started this lecture, or I worked at wherever it is you worked, or I learned Spanish. All of that is past tense. Of course, English doesn't always add ed. Sometimes it has irregular forms like went. You don't say I goed. You don't say I eated. You say went and ate. So sometimes it's irregular in English, and it will be too in Spanish. But the general rule is when you would use ed in English, in Spanish you're going to use what you're about to learn, el pretérito. So just like with the present tense, you're going to have AR conjugations, ER conjugations, and IR conjugations. Now, they're going to be different from present tense because they have to be in order to be able to portray something different about the verb. So in the case of escuchar, which is to listen or to hear, what you'll do is instead of using for yo the O for escucho, I listen or I am listening, you're going to use the E escuché in order to say I listened. So just like in English you would add ed to signify past tense, in Spanish these are going to be your AR endings for past tense. So for example, escuchar, we would drop the AR, add the E with the accent, and say escuché for I listened or I heard. For you listened or you heard, escuchaste. We would drop the AR, add aste. For he listened or she listened or you formal listened, you're going to drop the AR and add the O with the accent, escuchó. To say we listened, again past tense, you're going to drop the AR and add amos. Notice that it's the same form in present and past tense. So this is one of those weird situations where you're just going to have to know from context whether it's going to be past tense or present tense that people are talking about. And the last form for ellos, ellas, ustedes, or they and y'all or you guys, it's going to be escucharon. Drop the AR and add aron. Now here are the ER and IR endings for the preterite. If you want to put verbs like comer or another verb like compartir, which is an IR verb, if you want to put them into the past tense, these are the forms that you would use. Y, iste, yo, imos, yeron. So yo comí is I ate. Tú comiste is you ate. Again, we dropped the ER and added iste instead. Comió, él, ella, or usted comió would be he ate, she ate, or you formal ate. Comimos is we ate. And ellos, ellas, ustedes comieron would be they ate, or for ustedes, y'all or you guys ate. Here's a chart that's really easy to just pause and write it down because it has all of them in there. But just to point out, the ER and the IR forms are exactly the same. Y, iste, yo, imos, yeron for ER. Y, iste, yo, imos, yeron for IR. One good thing when you're taking notes with these kinds of verb forms would be to highlight any forms or underline any forms that have accents so that you don't forget to put them. So to say, I bought, compré, you bought, compraste, and so forth. I sold, vendí. I lived, viví. So these are, again, the past tense endings. Please try this question on your own and answer simply A, B, C, or D, making sure you're referring to your notes as you do it. Let's talk about some irregularities in the past tense. Just like when you learned present tense and you had irregular yo verbs or you had just irregular verbs or stem changing verbs, there are going to be some irregularities in the preterite or in the past tense in Spanish. One of them is with verbs that end in CAR, GAR, or ZAR. Let's talk about CAR verbs. anytime you put these verbs into the past tense in Spanish, so for example, the verb buscar, which is the one that I'm using here. Buscar is a CAR verb, so if it ends in CAR, you're going to do the following that I'm about to show you. For all of the forms, you're going to conjugate normally, except for the yo form. Okay, so for all the other forms, it's tú buscaste, él buscó, again using the AR endings. Nosotros buscamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes buscaron. That part is simple. But for the yo form, the C is going to turn into a QU. So instead of using this C right here, you're going to turn it into a QU and say, yo busqué. If you must know the reason for it, it is because the C and the E next to each other, if we just added the E with the accent, it would make the sound busé. And busé doesn't sound like the original verb buscar. And buscar means to look for. Now let's talk about GAR verbs. Same idea. So if you have a verb like jugar, just so you're aware, the G in the yo form will change to a GU. And you will say, yo jugué, tú jugaste, GU here, and then normal ending here. And the last type of verb that does this very strange little yo change is the ZAR type verb. So in the case of cruzar, cruzar means to cross, as in to cross the street, for example. If it ends in ZAR, just like a CAR or GAR verb would, if it ends in ZAR, the Z is going to change to a C in the yo form only. In all the other forms, notice cruzaste, cruzó would also have a Z, cruzó, cruzamos, cruzaron. They're all normal, but in the yo form, the Z changed to a C. Now, again, on your own, try pregunta dos, the second question. What you're going to do is plug in the verb empezar twice into this little example. So, in that blank, then, mi tarea más o menos a las 8 de la noche, no terminé hasta las 10:30, a qué hora blank tú. So try to figure out what form you're going to use, and keep in mind, it's a ZAR verb, so you're going to have to do that change from a Z to a C if you decide to use the yo form. And the last two verbs I'm going to talk to you about are ir and hacer. Now these two are irregular verbs, which is why they don't conjugate like a normal AR, ER, or IR verb. If they did, you would just drop the IR, drop the ER, and add the endings I just taught you in the previous slides. However, in the case of these, you just kind of have to memorize each one. They don't really look like the original infinitives. They look a little bit different, so you have to memorize them case by case. So ir is to go. Therefore, if I say fui, knowing it's past tense, it's I went. Fuiste is you went. Fue is he or she went, or in the case of usted, you formal. If you're talking to someone you address by last name, or you just address formally in general, you say you went, we went, and then y'all went or they went for fueron. Hacer is the verb to do or to make. So if I say I did something, past tense, hice. You made something, hiciste. He or she or you formal made or did something, it's hizo. We did something, hicimos. Or y'all or they made something, hicieron. And as a last practice question for you to do on your own, pregunta 3 is asking you to translate the sentence. Traduce la siguiente oración. The sentence is, el día que la maestra habló solamente en español fue un día muy difícil. The idea is, can you translate it and make sure you stay in the past tense when you do so?